when you start building a business, you want to build a business. You don't want to build a high paying job. So the idea is that you could walk away from the business for 6 months and come back, and it's either as it is now or bigger.
Welcome to Strength in Numbers, where we share real data from over our 400 plus clients, industry trends, practical strategies you can use to grow revenue, protect profit, and create value in your pest or lawn company. I'm Joe Brown. I'm Director of Business Development at PCO Bookkeepers and M&A Specialists. Today, I'm here with PCOB's founder, managing member, Dan Gordon, CPA, and it's not even on here, CEPA. So congratulations on your certified exit planner. Um,
Thank you.
so today, Dan, we wanted to have you on to talk about benchmarking smarter. Small companies versus large companies, how benchmarks might look different, and really from a financial aspect, some of those differences, and that sort of thing. Um, so the first thing really that wanted to mention is just give us an overview of like why benchmark. Like if you're not benchmarking today, why should it be important to me as a PCO or a lawn care owner? Like why even start benchmarking? And where do you start?
So it's a roadmap and it's a scorecard, right? So you want to get better and better each month, quarter, year, right? But you got to know where you're aiming. So that's why you would do benchmarking. The way that you look at things is you could benchmark against the industry. So if you look at our cost study, you can see how you're doing against, hundreds of other um, folks who are in the industry. You can benchmark against your budget, which you create annually, or you should create annually, right? You can benchmark against your prior history. So, say, this May over last May, and so those are the things that you do that you compare or benchmark against. Benchmarking is extremely important. You got to measure it so that you can improve it, and so that's why you do benchmarking.
Still, why do I care? Like, why do I care what you're doing as another PCO compared to like when it comes to industry stuff? Like, I have my blinders up. I just care what I'm doing.
Sure. So let's say you and I are track stars and we're running a mile, right?
Yeah.
And I'm at 5 minutes and you're at like 11 minutes, right? You want to get better and I want to get better too, but how much better can I get before there's diminishing returns, right? I can't go to zero, right? So benchmarking against others kind of gives you that, where do I get to? So if you look at the very best in class companies, they're trying to get a little bit better, but their increments are so tiny because they're really good. But, so let's say labor, you want to be at 22%. So let's say you're at 30%. Well, I've got a lot of room to win, but let's say I'm at 22.1%. And I got a tenth of a point that I can improve, right? Now, could I get better than 22? I might be able to, but I could never go to zero, right? So that's why it's important because this benchmarking will dictate profit. It'll dictate your growth, right? So, how are you doing against the industry? How are you doing against your budget? How are you doing against the past? It's extremely important that you look at these things so that you can get better and better, knowing that it doesn't, that there's a finite line there where you can't get any better, but you try to approach that, you know.
Well, I guess when you're looking at benchmarks, right? How do you, I guess, say I'm a small business, I'm under 1 million in revenue, right? Can I just look at Rollins financials and kind of see, okay, like if I want to become Rollins, this is what I need to do? Like, is there anything when it comes to a small business under 1 million looking at a 5, 10 million or billion-dollar business?
Yeah,
Like,
let's talk about that first. So Rollins,
yeah,
Rentokil, Ecolabs, all the public companies, they publish their results. but they don't give you the detail that we give you or that you should be looking at from your QuickBooks, right? So, yes, you could look at their gross margins. There's certain benchmarks that you can benchmark against, but let's create three buckets, right? So, and the reason that I want to create three buckets is because I've been doing this a long time, and there's two ways to make a lot of money in pest control: stay really small or get big. In the middle is when you have to hire that middle level management and you're going to take a step back and whatnot. However, if you stay really small, you can run the route, you can do the bookkeeping, you can, do the marketing and everything else. So you can run margins of 90 or 95%, right? It's your truck and everything else. So if you have a $300,000 route, could you make $250,000 a year running the route? You could, sure. But have you built value in your company, right? Because usually when you want to exit, or when, the fact of the matter is you're working for yourself. So if you worked for AT&T or IBM or some big company, you have pensions and 401ks and everything that hopefully by the time you retire, it's going to be worth something and you'll have retirement money. Your retirement, being self-employed, is basically the value of your business. Sure, you could do the 401ks and whatnot, but the idea is to build the value of that company. So at some point you could exit, whether it's to your kids or to a third party or whatever. So staying really small, we look at um, uh, two circles, and I'll call it the income circle, which is that 275, and the wealth circle. That's what you're going to retire with. So if you're doing $300,000, what are you gonna what can you sell that for? I don't know, 400,000 or 500,000, right? But if you're doing 5 million and you could sell that for 10 or 15 or 20, whatever $1 million, that's meaningful. But what is that break that where it, and it's somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million, right? So going from that 300 or 400 to 1.5 million is brutal, because you're going to take many steps back to get to step forward, right? So that said, we've got three buckets. We've got the owner operator who's driving his own truck and doing everything, and let's put that aside because his margins, you can't compare that to anything. But even the smaller companies and the larger companies, the P&Ls look the same, right? Now, you may, down to the gross margin, right? So you may be able to uh, pit yourself up against a Rollins or a Rentokil. Can they buy chemicals better than you? Probably. Can they buy insurance better than you? Probably. But what they can't do is the biggest expense, which is labor. You're going to be competitive with them. So your gross margins are going to be roughly where a Rollins, Rentokil, or Anticimex or any of those guys are, Ecolab, right? Whether you're a million or whether you're 100 million, that's the reality of it,
Is
right?
that even the case when the owner's out in the field?
Well, so when the owner's out in the field, we addressed that before, right? So he's running a route. You can't really make those comparisons because you're not taking the owner's labor into account in your gross margin. Now, if the owner's out selling, yeah, you could have an add back and whatnot. But my recommendations, if the owner's out selling, that you take his salary or her salary and put it into the sales cost, right? But where you're going to differ is underneath that gross margin line, right? Maybe you're trying to grow quite a bit, and so the public companies are spending 7% on marketing and maybe 3 or 4% on sales, so 11 or so, 10 or 11%. You might want to spend 20 or 25% on selling and marketing because you want to push that. You want to grow and you want to grow big, right? But once you're mature, then that's 7% on marketing and 4% on sales. That's a good number. By the way, as you grow, and the reason that you want to, that maybe you're paying 25% of all of that is because those companies, those big companies, they have a book of business that's 5, 7, 10 years old, right? And anything past 1 year, you don't have a marketing cost associated with it. So what it does is it serves to, they might be spending 25% on all new sales, but because they have their basket, most of their portfolio income is actually has no marketing cost associated with it. So it drives the average down to that 7%. But if they do a new branch, they're going to pay, 25% in sales and marketing for sure. And so that, depending on how you look at things, that could be different. That you're pushing the marketing. The other thing is that we look at that rule of 23 in our competitive index. That it kind of serves exactly what we're doing, right? Because the more you want to grow, the more you're going to spend. So you're going to drive the profit down and you're going to drive the revenue up. That's why you add those two factors for rule of 23 or the competitive index. Okay. So, that's important.
It sounds like with like marketing and that kind of thing, like for example, you have a $1 million company investing, let's say 50% into marketing. That's $500,000. But you could have a 5 million revenue company at $500,000, which is only 10% of their. So if you're looking at it as a percentage from there, it'll show 50% investment into selling and advertising versus 10%. But then when you actually boil down the numbers, they're investing the same amount into that. So the percentages when it comes to that can be off because you hear people say, like, oh, I grew 50% this year. No, a lot of times, yeah, you're growing 50%, but that's because the revenue was lower before. So like that can skew some of the benchmarks. And I know we've seen historically, what is it, like around 10% we see more mature companies in selling and advertising, give or take a
Seven,
couple,
seven, eight, 10, if you look
seven,
at like
eight.
Rollins, Rentokil, but the 50%, I grew 50%. I used to have a boss who I'd go in, when I first got into this industry, and I'd go in and go, "Hey, man, Ed, we grew 35%." And he'd look at me and go, "35% of nothing is nothing. Now go out there and do your job," right? So when you're a million, 35% is $350,000, which is probably a sales guy, right? So when you're 100,000, it's only $35,000. There is so, but those big companies can probably buy marketing a little bit better and are probably better at it than you are because they've got some pretty sophisticated people. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that you can't compete. You certainly can. So when I look at those, if you look at those, our cost study and pit it against the Rentokils, the Rollins, the Ecolabs, the numbers that they disclose are not that far off of our numbers, right? Because the model works whether you're a 10-man operation or 10,000 man operation. It's the same numbers, right? They can buy chemicals better. They can, maybe their truck leasing might be better, maybe insurance, but those are all small costs because the biggest piece of your P&L is labor, and labor doesn't change from big company to small company. In fact, those guys actually probably, because of their benefits package, probably pay a little bit more in labor than a smaller company.
So I guess like when you're looking at what type of financial data you're benchmarking on, like before you were talking about building wealth or just income, right? And
Hmm.
the PCO or lawn care operator needs to decide which route they want to go, right? Do they want to go through that middle period and take a step back, or do they want to continue business as usual and stay small and build pretty good living for themselves, but not as much building the wealth and the asset side? At what point do you think PCOs need to decide that?
It's a personal decision, right? You can have a lifestyle business, right? Run everything. There's nothing wrong with making $250,000 a year running a route and you don't have any bosses, and you call your own shots. We know lots of people who do that, right? But then when you start getting over that one or two man operation, you got to start to think about how that's going to pan out. And that million to million and a half, once you're over that million and a half, say, then you should get back to start making some money, because you're going to have to hire middle management in order to get you to that million and a half, right? Or you can be the manager and but the idea is when you start building a business, you want to build a business. You don't want to build a high paying job. So the idea is that you could walk away from the business for 6 months and come back, and it's either as it is now or bigger. And so you have to develop that management level.
Let's say I were to take a ton of one 500K to 1 million revenue companies, compile them all together, benchmark that.
Hmm.
Obviously, that's relevant to businesses in that revenue range. Is that relevant to a $5 million pest control company?
To get you to the gross margin should be, if you're doing it right, should be best in class and should compare against the biggest companies, right? Because what is gross margin? Gross margin is revenue minus the direct costs. Think about yourself. If we were a manufacturing operation, we manufacture hours of service. And I say this all the time when I do webinars but you're manufacturing hours of service, right? So if it costs me $100 an hour to manufacture it, meaning that the wage rate of my technician, his uniform, the chemicals, the piece of the truck that goes for the hour, and everything else, if that equals $100 and I want a 50% margin, then I have to sell for $200 an hour, right? And
Hmm.
that is, as long as you're selling for the right acceptable dollar per hour, your gross margin will fall in line. So basically, I'm selling it for $200 an hour. It cost me 100 to produce the hour. That means I have $100 gross margin, or some accountants call it a contribution margin. It contributes to paying off all the fixed costs. And once you pay all the fixed costs, it contributes to profit. So once you've paid the fixed costs, you're making money at a rate of 50 cents on the dollar, assuming you can keep those fixed costs steady.
So to answer that, it's relevant for the gross margin side, comparing a bunch of $1 million revenue companies, but is it relevant for all the financial metrics outside of marketing? And
Marketing and sales, that's
yeah,
going to
let's
be.
let's let's wash that one away. Does it impact EBITDA? Can I look at EBITDA if I'm the 5 million off of that, or do I want EBITDA of companies that have invested in the asset and building wealth more so when I'm looking at that? You know what I mean?
So if I were trying to do this in a real easy way, let's say you're at 25% sales and marketing, I would just knock off, call it 13% or so from that number and keep it at around 12. And then you can calculate it the same way. Your rent percentage should be the same. Your, the way you spend on your computers, all the office costs should all be the same, right? Um, you know, doesn't matter how big you are. So your CSRs in the office, what won't be the same is maybe your managers, you have a high paid manager, or your salary might skew it because, and I've seen this, I've seen like general managers in $5 million businesses making more money than if they worked for a Rollins or Rentokil, just because, you know what, I am the CEO. I just want a guy who can handle everything, who just makes my life easy. And we're making that kind of money, so I can pay him that kind of money. Whereas you're working for a public company, and they're really pushing hard to reduce those costs.
When it comes to, let's talk about EBITDA for a little bit, right?
Hmm.
Does EBITDA change from a percentage standpoint, benchmarking standpoint, or as you grow the business, how is EBITDA affected and what's the importance of the EBITDA? So earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. Ah, that's a mouthful.
So EBITDA represents EBITDA represents cash flow to the owner, right? Because depreciation and amortization are not cash expenses, right? Interest is an accrual. It's same thing. So it's the cash flow to the owner. That's what EBITDA represents. The reason it's important is it's used in, well, comparing different companies, but also when you're, valuing a company, you want to understand what the EBITDA is. And so that's important. Um, I would, as far as that goes, benchmarking against larger companies, you've got to normalize some of the expenses. So if, again, if you're paying way too much for advertising because you're growing, normalize that. If you're taking a salary that's way above what a corporate salary would be, normalize that, right? And then you could get to the EBITDA, right? I think looking at our cost study, because our clients are all private companies as opposed to public companies, that would be a really good benchmark because we're not, we have owner salaries in there. We have, all of these various items, the computer cost, the rental cost, everything else. That would be a good way to benchmark yourself. And quite honestly, how do we business is a game, and the way that you win the game is that your valuation is the highest. So, when you watch baseball and you root for your favorite team, the score is the financial statements, but the box score are the operational statements. Right. So you look at that box score and you see how you're doing. Is each of my technicians doing 250 to 300,000? Right. How are we doing? And those are the things that you look to compare and to keep improving, because in order to win this game at the highest level, you're going to want 25%, 20 to 25% of adjusted EBITDA. And I say adjusted because, you know, probably doesn't happen in your clients, but some of our clients put personal expenses through the business and whatnot, and you got to back those away. Your wife's car or
Get out of
gas, or
here, really?
that trip to Vegas for the Pest show. That you lost all the money in the casino, and that kind of thing. So
Not you, Dan. You're winning in the casino.
yeah, I don't know.
How do you get to adjusted EBITDA? Like, is that something that you can quickly kind of do, like an exercise yourself? Like, how do you do that if you want to know what your adjusted EBITDA is?
Well, you take net income. You start with net income, and then you add back your interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, and then you add back those personal costs. That's what you do to get to EBITDA
Yeah.
or adjusted EBITDA.
When it comes to like mean versus median, right? Averages versus the other. Are there some metrics that you want higher than the average, some you want below, and is there a cap on some where it's like, that's too high? Like, what have you seen there?
Yeah, you want to always look at the median, and I'll tell you the example that I heard, which was really good, is you, me, and Mark Zuckerberg are in a room, and we take an average of our salary. Is that relevant, or is the median relevant? Right? That's the that's how you want to look at that. You know.
The average isn't always accurate.
No, the average skews things, and in fact, what happens is when we do our cost study, we knock out some of the biggest companies and some of the lowest companies because it skews the data.
The last real thing that I wanted to ask you about when it comes to benchmarking and that sort of thing is the metrics per employee, right? How does that change? Like a small business might have an office manager that's also a CSR, so they're doing dual tasks, right? Like what are some talking points or things to mention when it comes to employee ratio metrics?
The ones that I find important are not necessarily the dollars you're spending in the office because you might have, your wife in the office or something like that and whatnot. What I like to do is I like to say number of office people to people on the road. And the reason I say people on the road is because it's not just technicians. Maybe you have salespeople and managers that are out there in the field, right? So depending on if you're a commercial business, you don't have the phone's not ringing as much, right? So your ratio might be more people on the road and less people in the office. If you're a residential firm and the phone's ringing off the hook and you need to answer all of that, it might be less. So I like to look at that. But what I really am interested in is my technician. um, what do I pay the technician and what does his route look like? And in this day and age, a route should be 250 to 300,000 or more. We have clients who have routes that are more. And if you can do that, all of your other numbers, I guarantee you will fall into place. Okay, that's just because you're going to pay the technician 60 grand, 65 grand, and he's running a $300,000 route, and you can work the numbers backwards, and you can see exactly
Does
what
it
I'm talking
change
about.
with size? Uh, like my thought is, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but like if I'm managing two technicians as an owner compared to having a service manager and they're managing 10 and then I have a couple on top of that, or is it more about like the setup of the business from the get-go?
Each technician is his own little micro business. Everyone should be 250 to 300,000 or more. If you can do that. Now, how does it get complicated? Okay, I have 10 technicians, the phone's ringing off the hook. If they're all filled up with stops, I can't take any new ones. The way I like to do that is I have 8 that are rock solid. Their routes are really tight, and we don't touch those. The 2 I have as floaters. They're going to be inefficient. They're going to be all over the place, but once they finish the setup or the start, then they go on a route. That's the way I would do that.
I appreciate it, Dan. I appreciate you hopping on, sharing your wisdom. Smartest man in pest control when it
Um,
comes to numbers. So,
Thanks.
appreciate you spending the time with us. And if you need one-time financial industry benchmark, CFO level guidance in your pest control or lawn business, that's what PCOB does for our clients every single day. You can get in touch with us at pcobookkeepers.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time in Strength in Numbers.